That's a bear. Is that a bear? It's a baby bear. Oh, it's not a baby bear. It's a wolf. It's a wolf. Abort. It's a wolf.
Hello and welcome to Zen Plays Games Badly. But today we're going to be just chatting about stuff. Mostly what we're going to be talking about is counselling, really. A bit odd, a bit out there, but it's not the first time that we've done something like this here on this channel. We've done some of the stuff around life coaching, around helping people understand what's going on and what that's about. And today we're going to talk a little bit about counselling. Now you're going to be sat there going, why? You've been gone for like a year and now you're back to do this. Okay, so I'm back to do this because I've been following a counselling course. And part of that counselling course is an independent study. And the course asks that we demonstrate to a wider audience, that's you, what counselling skills are and how they have a significant role in supporting people. And they asked us to kind of find new and interesting creative ways of doing that. And some of my peers, they made a blog. Some of my peers went out there and made a whole podcast, that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, what do I do? I thought, well, it has been a while, like a while, since I've loaded anything on Twitch. So maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of start doing that kind of thing again. So that's what I thought I'd do, dust off the old channel and spring it out to you. So the thing about counseling skills is that they are really just kind of a grab bag of stuff that you probably already do with your friends. The kind of things that you kind of, when you're helping someone who's had a rough time, how they actually deal with stuff, how you get through things. But there is something that kind of changes uh, how you deal with one another when we do that. Because when you are dealing with somebody who is having a rough time as a friend, you kind of fall into what is like a helping mode. And in that helping mode, what you kind of want to do is you want to be there, you want to be helpful, and you want to try and solve their problems. So you offer advice, you offer tips, you offer tricks. You sort of say to them, okay, this is what I would do in that situation. Counseling, or at least specifically human centered counseling, doesn't really do that. And it can kind of be a quite a tough thing to kind of get your head round. Uh, First message in the chat. Hey, Sticks the Weeble. Uh, Welcome. So, for those of you wondering why it's popped up with Sir Roger, one of the things that I do when I'm not streaming is actually role play. And Sticks the Weevil is Polio from that role play game. Just a brief pause from a massive shout out there for Hero Fest. Now, what I'm noticing, and you might have noticed, is that in theory, there is a chat bubble that's meant to kind of pop up this side of the chat. But I'm against a white background and it's coming out in white. That's just simply not going to work. So um, that's probably because some of these settings were done when I did actually have kind of a dark background way back when. So let me just see if I can update my chat box while we're doing that. Now it should just kind of work through. So we're just going to kind of stick it in a box. There we go, with a nice dark background. So if I save that and if I can just be so kind as to, hey, elusive elf, um, welcome back. There we go. And now the chat box is working. Absolutely fantastic. Welcome. Welcome. Elusive Elf used to be way back when, used to be my co-streamer on this place. Can you believe it? Look at us back. So today we are, it's like we never left. Trixie, welcome back. I mean, I think that's the trifecta. We we haven't seen each other in like forever. I fire up the screen and suddenly everyone's back. Um, it has in fact been ages. It has in fact been ages. So um, I'm here to talk about counseling. What I'm going to ask you to do is, if you do have some questions, if you've got random things that you want to kind of put out, um, we gained somewhat. Do you know what? It's absolutely amazing. Thank you all very much. So what I will ask you to do during this is, while I'm talking, is if you've got any questions, if there's something there that you want to know about counselling, let me know, because I'm going to record this, or I am recording this on Twitch, and then I'm going to send it to my tutor. So what I love about that is that he is going to get kind of a very real example of what it is to be on Twitch. Uh, a new and interesting thing about Twitch. Now, we've kind of got some stuff to kind of get through. So first is why counseling skills. Now, this is something. You don't have to behave yourself, elusive elf. What would be the point? Okay, counseling skills. Counseling skills is just a posh way of talking about the things that we do when talking. Charlia, welcome to the stream. Thank you very much, people. Do you know what? That seeing you all here is absolutely lovely, and might actually mean that I should probably dust this whole thing off a bit more often. So, welcome to the stream. Um, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is why do you need counselling skills? Because we all look after one another, we all talk to our friends, don't we? Especially if you're male presenting, talk to your friends about your feelings. Um, And we have a Dilly, absolutely fantastic. Oh, you do have a counselling question. I'm thinking of going back to counselling after a year of working on myself to help reflect. Is it a good idea to wait for the original counsellor to become available? Ooh, not necessarily. If you had a good relationship with your counsellor, that will have been then. That would have been the person that you were then. And what might help you reflect a bit more about who you are is by starting afresh with a new counsellor. That said, all counsellors are different. There are a whole raft of different types of counselling styles out there, and we're just going to talk. So the most obvious one, the one that we kind of see the most, is a thing called humanistic counseling, put together by Carl Rogers, and he operated on the idea that it all kind of begins from unconditional positive regard, the idea that you utterly support that person where they are in counseling, and you make space to do that. There are also other forms of counseling. There's CBT. CBT is okay. Is cognitive behavior therapy. Elusive elf, don't even. And that's about the kind of therapy that allows you to kind of deal with things in short, sharp sessions. Very good at kind of getting over smoking, very good at kind of moving on from addiction. Can be really useful in dealing with small bits of trauma. There's also psychodynamic counseling and sort of branches thereof. Psychodynamic counseling starts with the idea that the counselor, the therapist, is the one that's there to help you through things. They're the ones that's able to offer expert guidance through your own emotions. So back to Trixie's question, is it worth waiting for their original counselor? The short answer to that is yes. If you've got a relationship, it can mean that you don't need to rebuild that relationship again. But that would be in an ideal world. Sadly, in the UK, the waiting time for a counsellor can reach up to 18 months, nearly 2 years. And that actually is quite a large chunk to wait. If you are able to, I would suggest that maybe exploring other counsellors might be a good part of that journey rather than waiting 18 months for your original counsellor, because you can always go back to them if and when they become available. But it does mean that your therapy kind of continues as you go along. Now, a lot of that will entirely depend on what kind of therapy Trixie is looking for and the place in which Trixie is. And I do note that this is not to be taken as legal advice. Hashtag your mileage may vary and all that jazz. But that's what I would do if it were me, is that I have found the process of counselling myself to be very beneficial. Oh, and there's a question: difference between therapist and counsellor. Um, Difference between therapist and counsellor, there is none. Not in the UK anyway. Um, so, in the UK, any monkey can call themselves a therapist. Any monkey can call themselves a counsellor. And for different counsellors and for different modes, it means different things. The entire industry is not regulated at all. That's where places like the CPCAB come in, which is the particular course that I'm following. They are one of the institutions, yes, the institutions that accredit therapists or counselors. And they are the ones that say, look, this person has followed a course. We've given them a decent grounding in what we know. We've made them learn stuff, and they should, on balance, be ready for therapeutic counseling. Therapeutic counseling. Therapist, counselor. They're kind of the shortened versions of those two words. For some, they would want to make a difference around um, a therapist being somebody that follows a certain form of teaching, a counselor being somebody who has perhaps a lower form of accreditation. But your mileage may vary. It's a crapshoot. The best thing to do is when you find somebody is ask them if they're accredited. And they could be by the CPCAB, they could be by the UK BCAP, UK BAP, UK, I can't remember now, of counsellors and psychotherapists. No, Trixie, that's exactly what this is about. This is how we raise the profile of what counselling and therapy is all about. And hopefully, if this video is accepted, I pass my course. So, when you go to counselling, what are the kind of things that you're going to be expecting? So, we've been training in things called helping sessions because we are not trained and therefore cannot use or should not use the term therapist or counselling. And um, those skills are basically special ways of using interactions that we're all very familiar with. So we've got paraphrasing, we've got reflecting, we've got restating, and we've got summarizing. And they're all really simple, but also incredibly effective. So paraphrasing is just that. It's about taking what you've given and what somebody has said and say it back to them in your own, in sort of a slightly different, reworked way. Um, uh, to Zen's assessor, they should pass on the ground. They've been caring for my mental health for the past decade. Thank you, Trixie. I would love that that would actually count, but I'm not sure it does. Um, but paraphrasing is about giving that information back. Now, what that does is often by hearing your own words said, said back to you in a different way, you're able to properly hear them and properly internalize them. I'm just going to come back to some of the other statements. I just want to. So there's Anna's as Garmil. Mine currently has a lovely and infuriating way of holding up and occasionally calling me out in ways that pisses me off. Is that a common trait among professionals here? She seems to delight in making me scoff, become flustered. Delete. Yeah, that's paraphrasing. Basically, that's exactly what she's doing. Is she's hearing what you've said and going, okay, that's important, but I don't think you realize how important that is. I'm going to send it back to you. Okay, that's paraphrasing right there. Now, there are other tools that are kind of in that bag that they're going to use. So there is reflecting, and you've just used that wonderful word mirror. So they are reflecting back to you what you've just said. Um, this is not the same as paraphrasing, um, and it's not the same as restating, which we're going to be talking about in a minute. It's where somebody says something like, "Oh, I think so and so is awful." And you would hold a mirror up to that and say, okay, so you say that so and so is awful, but you've just spent a lot of time praising them, and you'd leave it there. You don't ask a question. You don't ask them to think about it. You don't push them in any way. You just leave it there and see what they want to do with it. Now, the next one that we're going to talk about is restating. Restating, which you'd think is kind of like paraphrasing, but it's a bit more direct. It's kind of where, okay, you say a thing, Bob is awful. Okay, Bob is awful, especially when they use powerful words, horrific, terrifying. That experience was terrifying. And suddenly people will go, oh, okay, I didn't mean terrifying. Or, yeah, terrifying. Actually, that's quite a big word. Restating, is that the same as reframing? No. No. Reframing would be a process of taking those words and giving you a different way of looking at them. Okay. Taking where you are and moving your perspective. Okay. Bob is awful. Let's pick on poor Bob. Bob is awful. Okay. Is Bob awful, or do you not like the way in which Bob interacts with you because of past trauma? Now, what's happened there is I've taken your statement about Bob is awful, I've taken some knowledge, and I've moved or offered you a move perspective into reframing. Now, that's not something that we would do, not at this level, because human-centered, person-centered counseling is actually about helping you do that work yourself. So we wouldn't really use reframing necessarily as a tool, um, unless it's kind of in a lot of these sessions. But I do say on the level 2 certificate. So I've got a lot to learn. I've got another sort of 3 years learning and grafting to kind of do. Then you've got summarizing. So summarizing is where you take something that somebody has said and you kind of give it back to them. All right. We've been talking over the last hour just about how much you hate Bob. We've talked about the ways in which Bob reminds you of your uncle, and we've talked a lot in ways in which how your uncle was very difficult for you. Does that sound like a fair summary of everything we've talked about? And that kind of gives what they've said, and it gives it back to them and kind of go, look, have I understood what we've talked about? And it's often a really good time for people to kind of pick that up and go, oh, no, 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 that's not what I meant. Those are the words I use, but that's not what I meant. That can be really helpful for a lot of people, because hearing how they are being perceived when they use certain words and the ways in which they discuss things can also help them think quite a lot about why it is that they've used those words, why they've used those terms, and is there something in that? Is there something in that summarizing that kind of gives back to them? Now, person-centered therapy, based on the idea of unconditional positive regard, is entirely there to on the basis that you, the client, the helpee, is the best person that's able to kind of deal with your problems. The helper then is there to kind of catch that stuff, just hold it up for a little, just to kind of go, okay, I think you're awesome. You've said this thing. Did you mean is this thing important to you? Okay, I think you're awesome. You said this other thing. Can I just hold this other thing up for you, because I'm not sure whether or not this thing is seeming as important as you are making it out to be. That kind of interaction. So those kinds of basic tools are kind of how you get a conversation once you've got it moving. You kind of want to get people talking, and you want to keep people focused. A lot of therapy, a lot of counseling goes round in kind of a circle from the outside. But what it's actually is more of a sort of screw going downwards. You start off talking about something very simple. Bob reminds me of my uncle. Talking about your uncle, okay, yeah, my uncle was an awful man. Talking about, okay, yeah, my uncle was an awful man. He locked me in a cellar. And those kind of stuff, we're talking a lot about the uncle, but we're slowly getting down and down to where the actual problem is. Um, and I should say, just for reference, all my examples are entirely made up, because I don't really know anybody called Bob with an uncle that locked them in the cellar. So having looked at those kind of skills, now those skills are there to facilitate the helping session, but you can very quickly see that if all we're doing is repeating back your words, you're not really going to get anywhere. And as Dilly's already said, it can be really frustrating. So this is kind of where the role of questioning comes in. Now, it should come as no surprise to you that most of the questions should be open questions, because they're not going to get anywhere if they're closed. Okay, quick note on what an open and closed question is. So, an open question is a question that gives scope for an answer. Okay. The easiest way to do this is by giving you an example of a closed question and then an example of an open question. So an example of a closed question is um, something like, here, as I fail to come up with a closed question at the top of my head. Do you like pizza? Your options to that are yes or no. You might want to go for a middle round of kind of sort of, but there isn't really much discussion there. An open question might be more like, so what's your favorite fast foods? Now, the answer to that could still be pizza, but it allows the client to kind of give more conversation, more things to talk about. How have you been feeling this week? Now, we're not asking, are you feeling a certain way? We're asking how you're feeling. And then the helpee answers that in a kind of, oh, I've been feeling all right. I'm fine. Okay, you're not fine. You're in therapy. I am. That's not true, by the way. That's a flippant joke. Um, but it helps people actually kind of start talking, and open questions help them talk. Predominantly in kind of counseling sessions, you will see the use of open questions. You may also see closed questions. Closed questions have their use. It's a very small one, but they have their use, especially when you've got somebody that's just avoiding answering a question that is actually really important. But to do that, those questions need to be direct and they need to be useful. You need to be aware that you, as a counselor, that's the person helping, isn't fishing. You're not using the questions to find out something. So let's say somebody comes along and says, "Oh, um, uh, my uncle is a famous footballer," and then doesn't mention them again. Now, you as a counselor might be going, "I want to know who's this famous footballer. This is kind of awesome gossip. Give this to me." That would be fishing. Now, unless there's a reason for me to know the name of that uncle, I'm not going to use it. We're going to just kind of think about that because we're going to come back to that in a minute. Whereas kind of a closed question should often be used kind of at the start. Yeah. So, are you comfortable? Yes. No. Would you like a glass of water? Yes. No. Do you understand the contract of this session? Yes. No. We don't really want to give people space in that because it's not really a dialogue. It really is. I just need to know. Are you comfortable? No. Cool. Let's fix that. Let's get on with the session. Um, so there are also kind of a third kind of section of questions. Is it really is kind of checking in questions? Is this okay for you? Do you want to take a break? Shall we stop here? Because sometimes these sessions do really go quite deep. And you do need kind of questions that show the client that you are listening, that you are giving that unconditional positive regard, that you are there 110% for them. And so sometimes you might need to give them an out. Do you want to end the session a little? Do you want to just sit with that heavy thing that you've brought for a minute? It's not really asking them about therapy. It's not really asking them about um, kind of a practical thing. It's giving them space to actually be human and to show them that you are human. You understand where they're coming from. Now, all of this stuff, all of this stuff um, is is kind of um, underpinned by the skill of trying to avoid um, unhelpful questions and encourage good questions. So, unhelpful questions are the loaded question, the question which kind of forces the client to answer in a certain way. And perhaps the most famous of these is, have you stopped beating your wife? It's an incredibly loaded question. You cannot answer that question without, in some way, fighting what the question is asking. Have you stopped beating your wife? No, because you never beat her in the first place. But it sounds like you've just admitted to beating her. Have you stopped beating your wife? Yeah. Well, so you were beating her, but you're not anymore. Have you stopped beating your wife? Look, that's not really a thing that's good. Where are you going with this? It's not a really helpful question because now we're off talking about something else and talking about the relationship. yes, it's a comedy question, and yes, that there might be a space maybe for that question in other forms of therapy, but it's not the kind of thing that you would find in human-centered counseling. It's a loaded question and it forces an answer. Perhaps a slightly more better useful answer would be, how is the relationship between you and your wife? How is the interaction between you and your wife? It's up then for the helpee to pick that up and run with it. What do they want to answer? It's fine. Okay. And those kind of questions lead us right into the next skill. And arguably, um, this is perhaps the most useful skill in all of that stuff. All of that stuff is busy, all of that stuff is noisy. And the most powerful one is a thing called silence. It's where you shut up, which I'm aware, for those of you that know me, is damn near impossible. But, it's why it's a skill. It's why we've worked on it. It's taken me a year. I'm almost there. Silence is where you just stop. Doesn't really work on a live stream because it's a one-way interaction. I'm talking at you. But there is something quite natural about the human interaction that when I stop, you talk. It's how conversations work. At some point in our development, we learn the very basis of that is that a conversation is I talk, you talk, I talk, and we swap. What therapists and counselors do is we use that. I say something. So, how are you feeling? You say, I'm all right. I say nothing. One of two things is going to happen. Now, we're either going to end up in a really uncomfortable silence, or eventually you're going to start filling that silence because it's uncomfortable, or because that human interaction kind of requires stuff. The skill as a therapist then is to be actively listening, to not have just gone, how you feeling? They go, all right. And you go, yeah. But to be there, to be present, to be listening, to be wanting to hear their next words. And you'll see therapists do this in all kinds of ways. There's a leaning in, there's a sort of active use of body language, there is eye contact, there is sort of a sort of comfortable space that the therapist kind of puts together in order to kind of make sure that that happens. Now that kind of stuff is pretty powerful. And therapists and counselors will do all kinds of things to remove any kind of barriers to you just being able to speak into the silence. It's why they ask, are you comfortable? It's why they make sure that their room is as normal as they can be in an environment that fits them. You could go to 1,000 counselors and all of their offices would be different. I went to one and they had kind of pictures of beaches on the walls because they found beaches calming. I spent most of my time going, oh, I wouldn't mind being there. My current therapist, surprising none of you that I'm in therapy, my current therapist has kind of guitars and stuff because his therapist office doubles as where he practices guitar. And it's kind of just normal because he's just normal. That silence then becomes an incredibly powerful way of getting people to talk. It also gives people time to think. Silence is not a thing that we have very much in the modern world. And giving people time to sit there and think and actually think, all right, how have I been this week? What has been my experience, can actually be quite powerful. How often do we sit down and ask ourselves, how am I? The silence can also be powerful in another way, in that a comfortable silence, a silence where people are talking, um, and then that silence just happens, can almost be a real good sign of connection and of trust. I noticed Charlie coming in there saying that silence is unnerving. Now, Charlie, I think that you're the kind of person that if somebody shuts up, you're going to want to talk into that silence. You're going to want to make sure that silence doesn't happen. Polio there, the opposite side, going, I love silence. But Polio, is that silence on your own or silence shared with others? Is that kind of a communal silence where you kind of sit together doing kind of parallel play? Nice. There is something beautiful, just in human interaction, by the way, of sitting with somebody reading a book, drinking coffee. Just love it. You have to fill the void as your anxiety kicks in. Now, silence on my own, great. Silence with someone, I will ramble. Now, the skill of a therapist, I'm just going to take that. The skill of a counselor and the skills that we're being trained to is to kind of guide that rambling. Um, you need to be on all the time. Interesting, Trixie. Who are you being on for? Uh, it also will keep silence, let them talk their way out the door. Yes. Like performative. Ah, yes. Oh man, do you know how much I want to take that question and ask you a follow-up? Because let me just give you an example. The mask may never slip, like performative. What are you performing, Trixie? I know you're more than open, Trixie. So tell me, um, what are you performing? And it's going to be a small pause where, were this not a live video, I would just hold silence. Let Trixie just have a think about what is it that they are performing. Now, Trixie has already offered us the backup that they're masking, but I'm not picking up on that. The role that they're performing is normal, living in a cishet normative world where I have to fit in. Now, notice how powerful some of those words are, where they have to fit in. And so we could reflect that by saying, you have to fit in. And we just leave it. We see where they go with it. Let the channel fall into silence. Now, the difference here is that it might be a live chat, but Trixie feels doesn't have that same kind of sense of need to respond to that. And because we're live on Twitch, and we are live, folks, is I have to kind of keep talking because that's kind of how this thing works. Thankfully, I've done a lot of work on that, and the source of the need to perform comes from parental pressure. So I've been working this last year on being more authentic self, but it takes time. Now, we could reflect that. So we could say, perform comes from parental pressure. We could pick out of that. So you've been working on yourself. Tell me a bit more about that, and offer them a question to kind of expand on. especially if we want to keep it kind of at the surface, which, this is live, so that's kind of what we would aim for. We could also kind of take we'll come to that question in a minute. So we kind of take that and we offer it back. Now, Trixie at first would need to say, just to kind of fill that void, to kind of let it all out. And kind of as a therapist, you just want to kind of take that and kind of hold it up. I love how there are so many threads to go down, but how do you avoid the rabbit holes? Okay. The you in that sentence, I think, is the important thing. As a therapist, they're not rabbit holes. They're important to you. Okay. So if you want to go down them, you want to go down them for a reason. And you might want to go down them because they're a dead end. And you might want to go down them because you're avoiding something. Now, we may not pick that up in the first session. We may not pick that up in the second session. But over time, and that's why why you need more than one session. Rabbit holes and fun in the beginning. It helps me to work out how to interact with the counselors in the first session. Avoidance, my old friend, says Trixie. Except the skill of the counselor is to kind of let you just run for a little. All right. But then we've got kind of the hardest thing. And this is something that we don't really do at this level. But is that kind of breaking into that and go, okay, I see that we're now talking about the Jester's Tea Party. Can we just talk about how that's linked to parental pressure? Or we seem to have gone away from the subject. Can we just bring this back to talking about my earlier question? And with some people, you kind of just got to interrupt, just got to kind of break into that conversation. You've just got to say, I get it. Okay. We're somehow talking about cars. How did we get here? Where did we go? What is it about cars that's linked to parental pressure? And by bringing that back kind of to that center where we started, people will then kind of go, nothing. So why are we talking about it? Oh, I didn't. Kind of a rabbit hole. Where did we come off? We kind of talked about that. And they might have just lost the thread. They might have just kind of gone all over the place. That's okay. That's okay. It happens. And so you then just kind of need to find some place in that branch to bring it back. Just bring it back. Now, in a kind of humanistic sense, it's important because all of those rabbit holes are really about you. You want to be talking about cars, you're talking about cars for a reason. Okay, that's the theory behind this. Okay. And you might be talking about cars because I, as a therapist, have actually put barriers in the way of you talking to me properly. So, barriers or blocks are barriers to this kind of communication. Now, one major barrier right now is that you're talking in text and I'm talking live. So I can't hear the tone of your voice. I can't see your body language. I can't see whether you're fidgeting with something, that kind of thing. And it's why some of the barriers are about location and place. So in the study guide, the Counselling Skills and Studies guide, it talks a little bit about barriers that are kind of non-traditional. So let's talk a little bit about what are barriers to this kind of communication. Okay, so barriers would be that and they can be anything. All right, and they can be as simple as gender. Okay, if you are female presenting, you may not feel comfortable talking to a male presenting therapist about things that are particularly feminine. Okay. And a lot of that is because you're going to feel like I'm going to have to explain stuff. I'm going to have to kind of talk about periods. I'm going to have to talk about the pressure to be feminine. I'm going to have to talk about the pressure to perform in a way that being male presenting, you just don't get. And that can be quite a barrier about explaining things. So you're talking about cars. You're talking about cars because you know that's a way of connecting with a male presenting therapist. Formative femininity, yes. Um, but those barriers, those kind of barriers, I know her well. Uh, we are becoming more acquainted with her as we speak. But those kind of barriers can also be the fact that you are in a counselor's office, which can be quite weird. But the barrier can also be that you're online and you don't feel that you're living in the moment. The barriers could be that the counsellor has decided that everybody must sit on beanbags because they're uncomfortable, and you're like, how do you sit on a beanbag? Who sits on beanbags? Or that the counsellor has decided that everybody's got to sit on a kind of straight back chair because it means that the session will be more focused. Now, really quickly, you're probably going to be picking up from that all kinds of therapists of all different ways, they become kind of like magpies, picking up different bits along the way. Because Carl Rogers, in his person-centered therapy, it means that you, the therapist, of as much part of the therapy as the person that's there. You have got to be your real, authentic self. You've got to know yourself before you can help others. You've got to be self aware so that you can know what barriers you might have to listening. Let me give you an example. Let's say that we are talking about, I'm trying to think. So let's say we are talking about football. Okay. I know nothing about football. And if you want to come to a session and talk about football, I can be interested and I can understand the game to a point. But there's going to come a point where if you're talking a lot about football, I'm either going to have to change the topic or I'm going to end up tuning out because I'm going to be like, yeah, cool. I do not care that Ronaldo got a touchdown in the 42nd minute. Okay, it's not a thing that I'm interested in, and that becomes a barrier then to this kind of communication. And as Charlie pointed out, that the rabbit holes are fun because it begins to help me work out how to interact with the counselors. Charlie then is actually doing that game that we all do when we go to counseling. All right. We all do that thing of going, can I trip them up? As though the counselor is some sort of great expert, but they're not. Okay. They are just someone that has spent some time learning and they've come out the other end influenced by their own experiences, influenced by the therapy and the way in which human centered therapy has been delivered. And they are doing their best to be as therapeutic with you as they can be. And there are barriers, both known and unknown. The stuff that I know about myself and the stuff that I can't possibly know about myself. That's a really good reference, by the way, to a thing called the Johari window. And if you don't know what it is, go look it up. It's a real interesting insight into who you are. Um, and you'll notice that I've chased a rabbit hole. I've gone down the rabbit hole of barriers because I think they're useful. I think they're important for you to know because I think ultimately that everybody should have some form of therapy. And I think therapy really should be generally more accessible, it should be easier, and there really should be more of us. The problem is, of course, like anything that's therapeutic, it takes time to learn. And that learning process, which is vitally important, is long and it can be difficult. But I think actually that therapy has wonderful things that it can do for people. If you're one of those lovely people who actually think that you don't need therapy, It may be because you imagine that therapy is something that happens to people who've had real traumatic lives, grown up in war-torn South Wales, or existed in the isolation of Manchester. But therapy can also be about specific things. So it can be about loss, having lost a parent, having lost a dog, and you find yourself overly sort of responding to that in negative ways. That's what therapists are for, because there are always, the human brain is weird and complex. It's a thing that's there to help us deal with evolution, which made sense when we were living in caves and hunting dinosaurs, and now we're basically plants with anxiety. Okay, because we've got to live in societies in which we're not really designed for, struggling against external pressures that we often can't put a name on. And sometimes just knowing what they are important. And sometimes just knowing that you've got that hour, a week or a month to just kind of put it all down and sort it all out can actually really, really make a difference. So as we're coming to the end of this stream, as we're coming to the end of this, ending the counseling session is just as important. Um, it's just as important as to where you start. At the start of a counseling session, you cover things like confidentiality. You cover things like making sure that you know where each other stands. You explain the notion of limited confidentiality. So, for those who don't know, limited confidentiality means that everything that you tell a counselor is confidential, okay? Except, and these are really important except if they think you are in danger of hurting yourself or someone else. That's quite a big except. Except if you divulge that you have and are actively harming a child. Okay, that's quite a big except. In that case, the therapist has a moral and legal obligation to do something about it. There are certain forms, psychologists and that kind of thing, where some of that doesn't apply. But a therapist, you come to them going, I think tonight I'm going to go murder my mum. If they believe you, they have a moral and legal obligation to act. Okay. They will also take some of the stuff that you said and they may talk about it in a thing called supervision. But in that supervision, you will never be identified. Supervision is part of that therapist, that counselor knowing themselves. It's where they kind of go, I had this session and this person talked about a thing, and oh my word, all of a sudden I'm thinking about, old Yeller and how they died, and it really threw me through a loop. And they are talking to the supervisor about a way in which they can kind of just deal through that emotion, because they can't go talk to their family because that shit is confidential. That's what the supervisor's for. They might also have a client where they're going, look, I can't get the client to kind of to move past this thing. What have you got? Supervisors are often more experienced. They've done a supervision course done by the BCCAB, and that kind of stuff they actually have those skills that they can share with people from experience and from that knowledge to help them move on. So you start with limited confidentiality. You start with, look, we are with your boundary. Look, we're going to be in this session for an hour. We're going to be talking about this stuff. And I'll give you a warning before we end. That's how you start. So as you come to the end, in theory, you get a warning. Now, I tend to find that in my session, what I get is, I'm afraid we're going to have to end in a minute, normally as we go over time. But that's not my job. When I'm the person in the chair, it's not my job to keep track of the time. That's the job of the therapist. So the therapist is the one that will hold that boundary for you. So don't be checking your watch. Don't be worrying about the time. If they let you run over, there will be a reason for that. They know their diary. They know what they've got coming up next. They know whether or not what you're talking about is something they're going to be able to pick up, or whether or not it's something they can feel comfortable to let you take home. Ending that session is really important. And it's why there is a fairly standardized way of doing it. And kind of all therapists develop a way that works best for them. So at the end of a session, you kind of want to do it gently. You want to give that warning. We're going to have to end in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever. Just because it stops you as the person kind of starting a new thought. And they might have to interrupt you. They might have to kind of come in and go, just so you know, we're going to end in 5 minutes. Just so you can kind of begin to emotionally prepare yourself for the outside world. The therapist might also then offer you a summary. It tends to be what my practice is, which is to summarize everything that we've talked about. That little bit of summary can be really important because it helps you, the person listening, know what it is that I've heard you say, the bits that I've picked out. And you might leave the session going, okay, but I felt that it was more important this thing, and they didn't mention that in summary. And that might be something that you can kind of think about and work about, and maybe if you wanted to bring it back to the next session. That summary then might also give you space. The trick, and it is a trick that I'm still learning, is to not ask a follow-up question. Give the summary and then go straight to diary. It is very tempting every time I do this to kind of go, and are you okay with that? And off we go. We're back talking. We can't. We have to end the session. And it's important to end that session gently, because when it ends as a kind of too fast or too quick, it can really leave like a kind of an emotional um, river. You're on this emotional roller coaster in therapy. And if suddenly you've got to stop, you find yourself kind of halfway down, you don't know where you're going. And rather than kind of coming gently to a stop, what you do is you just kind of fall. And all of that emotion just kind of washes over you. It's why it's really important to end that session in a way that is helpful and is useful. It's why it's important that you, the person in the seat, know it's coming to an end, because then you can kind of deal with that. Some therapists might end the session early, and they might bring it to an end early so that they've got time to sit with you in that ending space. That space where they kind of go, okay, we've talked about a lot. Let's just take a breath. Let's just be in there. Because there's that unconditional positive regard. That's about making sure that you, the person, is okay, not just you, the client, is okay. Now, as we kind of go through that whistle stop tour, I think these are skills that are useful not just in counseling sessions. I think they're actually really useful because it helps people move from sympathy to empathy. And I find that it is important for me when my friends come to help, when I'm emotionally struggling, that they offer empathy rather than sympathy. Sympathy tends to be where they go, oh, bless. Well, never mind. Sympathy also tends to be that dusting off of past experience and offering it as though they understand. Oh, I see you've broken your arm. Oh, I know how that feels. I broke my arm once too. Oh, it was awful. I cried for days. And, people signed my cast. And here's my life story about how I broke my arm. Cool. Cool story, bro. But it's my arm that's broken. Empathy is where you move past that. Empathy is where you come to that, and somebody says, "I broke my arm." That must that that I imagine must be tough. How is it for you? I you went super Welsh there. That's because it was a super Welsh person that gave me that story. Um, that's also not true. Um, it's because I am Welsh, Trixie. Um, where was I? It's about it's about wanting to know how are they feeling. You broke your arm. Okay, that must be tough. Tell me about it. Let me hear that pain. Let me hear that sorrow. It is like when you go super Scottish with certain topics, but most of those topics aren't safe for work, Trixie. Um, the empathy is where you kind of come alongside somebody. It's why the silence is important, is that you can just sit there in the sadness with somebody. You don't have to talk. You know they're upset, they know they're upset, and all you're doing is being there with them because sometimes there are no words. Sometimes there is no great magic pill. You don't have to fix things. And that's the thing about therapy, especially person centered, that people think that you're going to fix it. No, you're not going to get a magic pill. You're not going to come in, do 6 weeks of therapy, and suddenly be the most emotionally balanced person in the world. You might be, but maybe you need more therapy. Because what therapy does is offer you that empathy, that unconditional positive regard, giving you the space to actually feel and be a real person. No ears, no graces, no performative gender, just you. And that, weirdly, is one of the most radical things about therapy, is that a good therapist is somebody who goes, cool, I want to know about you. Now, a therapist might, in that, go, here's a little bit about me. But that little bit about me should be not, oh yeah, I broke my arm, it was awful. Oh, I tell you, there I was, walking down the street, I tripped over and it was awful. Broke it in all those places I did. Oh, I tell you, I screamed and I screamed. You could have heard me all the way to Blind Eye, really. I was surprised it took them so long to get the ambulance to me. It's because I was making more sound than the siren. Welsh enough for you, Trixie? Um, but that self-disclosure is where somebody says, I've broken my arm before. It was rough. Full stop. End of discussion. Tell me about how it is for you. I'm not offering it there. I'm not offering it there as a way of making it about me. What I'm doing is saying, okay, I understand. And what that's helpful is means that you don't have to explain to me the process of breaking an arm, about going to x-ray, about getting it plastered or whatever, because I've been there. And that might not be what you want to talk about. Maybe it is, but it gives you a way of kind of coming past it. It's why in some sessions where somebody, a client, might say, I'm exploring my gender, the therapist might go, um, you know, just so you know, I tend to refer to myself as agender or queer, not because I'm making it about me, but because now you know I'm a safe person. Now you know this is a thing that we can talk about. Now that you are not explaining to somebody something that they don't really have access to. I feel the raging ADHD throws it into overshare, which ruins the point of trying to show I've also been there and shutting the hell up. Exactly, Dilly. Um, I can sense the overshare but lack the off switch. Dilly, that's what counseling skills are for. That's what counseling skills are for. If you were to kind of take some of these skills and don't even start with the overshare, don't do the self disclosure. Oh, I'm having a rough day today. Your response then is a rough day, full stop, silence. Now, I know that with ADHD, that may not be the case. That might actually be physically impossible for you. But by taking the skill of avoiding the overshare completely and giving them space, they're talking now and you don't have to. Okay, that's a very simple example of kind of those skills we talked about earlier. All I did there was reflect. And if you can't do that, if you can't kind of cut out the sentence, you can restate it. You can give that sentence back to them. You broke your arm. All I've done is said the same words. And all of a sudden they're going, oh, yeah, I broke my arm. It was terrible. It was awful. This is now all about me. And you're listening, and that's great. And I know you're listening. I know you're listening because you've said my words back to me. You heard my words. All of a sudden, I'm feeling listened to. I'm unburdening. Even if your ADHD is kind of there going, mushroom, 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 llama, 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 right? It doesn't really matter, okay? Because they think they're being listened to. Now, in a therapy session, your brain kind of going off like that would be one of those things that you'd have to work on. If you were a counselor, you would have to kind of look and find ways of being in the moment, of being focused. But in counseling skills, in just kind of helping out a mate, that's not necessarily the case. One of the skills that I know that counselors use is they doodle, especially those with ADHD. They doodle as a way of actually kind of giving them a way of stimming while paying attention. So here we go, polio. I'm going to use all of this at some point next year. My friend is providing end of life care to their dad and has zero ability to emotionally connect because they were brought up in an incredibly toxic masculine environment. Wow. They have no faith in counseling or therapy, and I'm pretty much their only output. So all are going to be super, super helpful for me to help, not them self-confide. Polio, if this stuff has helped, that's fantastic. Now, Polio, you know me outside of Twitch. If you want to hit me up for other kind of skills and stuff, I'm absolutely happy to offer the skills. I can't just offer the therapy. Dilly, the neurospice also doesn't know when someone needs to vent or that they want help. I only really learn to ask out loud, cheerleader or advice. Absolutely, yes. It is one of the hardest things to learn is how do you say, do you need me to fix this? Do you need me to help? Do you need me to listen? The joy about a therapy session, particularly, is they're coming for therapy, so you don't need to ask the other two. But kind of in the real world, knowing that actually what they want to do is very helpful. I would, say that the joy of the counselling skills is that you can offer them first, and people often kind of are much more able to self-advocate if they know they're being listened to. So if they're going, my world is awful, and you restate my world is awful, oh yeah, it's so bad. I just feel overwhelmed. It'd be really nice to have someone to help. Boom, there's your offer to help. But starting in with that empathy can really make the whole world of difference until you hear, they will often, very often self-advocate. Cheerleader, yeah, Charlie, everything offered here is and I'm saying that on Dilly's behalf because sure, it's now live. Cheerleader advice or mechanic. Look at that. Support you, give you the advice or fix it. Well done, Polio. And what's really helpful there, actually, Polio, is I think that's a very masculine way of offering it. It might be something that you might find useful for your friend who is used to that quite toxic masculine environment. Is that they would kind of get that in reference. Oh, nice. Sorry, Polio. I'm in the let's be a therapist and share mode. Um, rather than kind of paying attention. So we're bringing this session to an end. We've got maybe another kind of 10 minutes or so. See what I did there, folks? Tick. So this is your opportunity to just kind of ask me some questions. Is there anything that you've got that's really burning that you kind of got to go, yeah, actually, Zen, this is the bit where I want to know. I want to know stuff about counseling, why you're doing counseling, that kind of stuff. And if anybody asks me where babies come from, that's a different stream. Okay. Um, so if you've got any ideas, now's your chance. What would you like to talk about? Damn it, you deflected my question. Which question did I deflect? Uh, Trixie? You know me too well. I do, Trixie. I do, sadly. And being as I am going to be handing this entire stream in, um, not quite counselor skills, but so many counselor skills that are useful for parenting. They are useful for parenting. However, I will say that counselling for children is actually something that's completely different. Um, in that there are skills there um, about letting the child use their imagination, about letting them kind of explore their thing. That is not a thing that I have been trained in. Um, because I foster, I am hammering the therapeutic parenting drum for anyone that will listen. Absolutely. Um, communication communication skills with small people is vitally important because they are people. Okay, giving them space to actually have the emotion is very helpful. Now, obviously, as parents, we are also people, and those two things can clash. It is kind of very important to remember that you are also a parent. Um, just going to kind of just bring that back. To anybody have any kind of uh, a lot of it directed at me by my therapist just in adulthood. Well, there is kind of a therapeutic process in kind of talking about that kind of emotional control because sometimes we didn't get it. Sometimes it's not a thing we learned, but that's me falling into the helping mode. That's the life coach in me. That's the bit that wants to kind of fix it. That is not counseling skills. So does anybody have any kind of thing they would like to talk about specifically about counseling? Anything that you think I might have missed? Anything that I wasn't clear on? Um, I'm going to wait now and hold some silence. What is my favorite silence? My favorite counseling skill is silence. Um, because I've seen it do some really powerful things. Um, I have seen it give people space to say the words they've never been allowed to say. I have seen it give people space to build up the courage to say the real thing, the thing that is really on their minds, that rabbit hole that they've been diving down and avoiding. You give them silence and they will kind of go, look, what I'm really here for is that. And I think perhaps, oh, hang on, body language. Mine calls me out on a lot of tense shoulders, nail biting. How would you control yours to come across as neutral when in a session? Dilly, I'm not giving you that answer. I'm not giving you that answer because it's not about controlling your body language. Your body language is saying something for a reason. Your body language is saying things and it is talking when you aren't yet able to. So giving you a way, you can't cheat therapy. There's no point cheating therapy. We could all pick up a book and learn how to control our body language. We can all find ways of removing those kind of stuff. But in therapy, you need to be you. And if you're stressed, if you're anxious, if that nail biting is something that is a trigger for you, if that nail biting is something that says something about who you are or what you do, that's really important because that tells the counselor something. They might know what, not know what, but they might be able to get you to say what it is, and that can be powerful. I nail bite because, even if you can't do something about it, knowing it and catching yourself doing it can be really powerful. I'm not going to tell you how to control your body, Dilly. It's part of therapy. You don't know why yet, Dilly. You don't know why yet. There could be a whole host of reasons, which I am not therapeutically qualified to explore. But ask me when I do a live coaching session on here, and I'll give you my best shot. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. No, that's way too much to unpack. Thank you very much for listening, for coming to this kind of one-off. And I've always meant to do these sessions, but it is really a one-off while we get settled. Um, where we've talked about a whole host of things around counseling skills. We've talked about paraphrasing, reflecting, restating, and summarizing. We briefly touched on self-disclosure. We talked about the different kinds of questions, opens and close, and checking in. Um, and we talked about loaded questions and why they absolutely should be avoided. We talked about silence and why that is a vital tool and how that really brings out the best in people. And we talked about how best to end a session, about giving warning and bringing it back. We talked a little bit about confidentiality and how important that is, and about building that safe space in which for people to talk. So thank you very much for listening. I am so glad that you've had something useful out of it. And remember that whatever it is that you do, please do kind of give therapy a go. And if you can wait the 3 and a bit years for me to be qualified, I would love to take you all on as clients, but you're all friends, and therefore it's probably unethical. Sorry. Uh, so thank you very much for being here. And whatever it is that you are doing with the rest of the day, remember amongst all of that, that you are awesome. I've been Zen. You've been awesome. Have a great afternoon. Bye bye. I only put that up so I could end the session. So, there's an ad in 8 minutes, and I felt it weird to go before the ad started. But you've all gone anyway. But also, what I didn't want to do is that we should probably go off and raid someone before you all disappear. But I also didn't want that going into the recording. Oh, look, there's now a raid browser. Look at that. Raid browser. Find someone to raid. Um, ooh. Only the raid browser doesn't work. How annoying. Um, okay. Uh, yes, open the raid browser. That's what I was doing. Why? What? Okay. Now, why are you? Look, show me the people I'm following. I'm not randomly taking my channel. Well, I guess the only person online that isn't in the channel. Um, yeah, I mean, Twitch is incredibly different to a year ago. I've got a whole bunch of tools. I've got this really useful ad bar along the top. Um, it's kind of cool, actually. I'm not expecting it from an Amazon company. I've got to be honest with you. Um, but yeah, so what we're going to do is we are going to go off and we are going to raid Wolvie. So as we do that, Wolvie 86, as we do that, um, I haven't seen them in like forever. But please do, if you've not already got it, please do remember to spam the chat with the little top hats. Um, I will tell you that it is a adult stream. So it is kind of Turtles and Chill Channel. I will have to go and follow that. But also remember, I suppose I should give myself an advert, actually. Is that I do have a Discord, so you can pop into that Discord and say hello. Um, and it'd be good to have you all. Um, I am also on Mastodon. I don't do X anymore because I don't like supporting fascists. So I'm over on Mastodon as Black Xanthus. I'm on Instagram as Black Xanthus. I'm basically everywhere as Black Xanthus. So hit me up, give me a follow. It'd be great to see you all. So we're going to go off and raid Wolvie. We're going to click start raid. So please do remember to kind of click that follow raid stuff. And as we dive into a great big hello to Wolvie so that he all knows you're there. Thank you very much for being there. I've been Zen. You guys have just been awesome. See you soon. Bye bye.